Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are here for the second part of the FoodTech Rethink series. Today is the BC panel, moderated by Susana Garcia Robles. Thank you very much, Susana. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Very quickly, we're gonna play a video, an introductory video from IDB Lab CEO Irene Sáenz. And after that, we'll start promptly with the panel. Thank you.
Welcome to the Rethink series, brought to you by Angel Ventures and IDB Lab, the innovation laboratory of the Inter-American Development Bank. During these COVID times, startup founders are struggling to find their way in the current situation and adapt to a new normal. And startups in emerging markets are no different. Yet there are some unique challenges and opportunities. There are some thriving startup ecosystems in many markets. Yet comparable emerging markets of Latin America, the Caribbean, MENA, Southeast Asia, they make for unique opportunities along certain sectors which we should be rethinking, considering the potential impact post-COVID. Global investors and corporates are already taking notice, and they've already signaled an increase in funding for some of these sectors. IDB Lab, being the most active venture capital investor in Latin America and the Caribbean for the last 20 years, is supporting this initiative led by our trusted partner, Angel Ventures. They have been doing a lot of work to support the ecosystem, and now we welcome their efforts on building bridges to other emerging markets, to build those synergies that I think can prove more valuable now than ever. So we hope you enjoy the webinar, and more importantly, that together we reimagine how these verticals emerge after the pandemic to generate a positive impact in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that you also join us in rethinking the future for startups. Thank you.
Okay, so that's actually Irene Arias, not Irene Sáenz, who's my friend. With that correction, Susana, please carry on. Thank you very much to everyone.
Well, thank you, Camilo. Thank you, Hernan, and all the organizers. I love the underlying topic, Rethink Food Tech in Emerging Markets. For those who don't know me, as at the end of February, I left IDB Lab after 21 years working there, building entrepreneurial ecosystems and the venture capital industry, where we invested twice in Angel Ventures in their two funds. And now I joined Capria, which is a global impact fund of funds operating in Southeast Asia, India, Africa, and Latin America. And I'm also the executive advisor of the Latin American Venture Capital and Private Equity Association. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you, and everybody will do it on their own to be just and fair. It's always so hard to talk about the rock stars we have in this panel: Maxence de Royer, Nestle, Michael Kendall, Blue Horizon Ventures, Rashid Sultan, Sabor Ventures, Mark Khan, Omnivore, and Jose Garcia Pimentel from Uber Eats. So I will let each one of you introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Susana. So I think I'm the first one to start. I am Maxence de Royer. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Business Development for Nestle in the Zone Americas since basically 2 months. Started the position remotely as I could not leave Mexico City, where I'm still based, to go back to Switzerland. And prior to this, I was the VP of Strategy and Innovation in Nestle Mexico precisely, where we had created within Nestle a strong innovation ecosystem, really engaging a lot with the startups, with the universities, with the venture capital community as well. We've run a lot of crowdsourcing with our own employees to drive this innovation mentality, and the winners obviously receive funds to implement their ideas and also win a specific course. Part of this innovation journey we also had invested in Agile Ventures as an LP to create something kind of unique in the region, the FoodTech vertical. And the idea of that investment is to invest in very promising startups throughout the region with a strong focus on the countries of the Pacific Alliance. So this is a little bit about Nestle and about myself.
Thank you.
And I guess I'm up next. My name is Mark Khan. I run a fund called Omnivore in India. We have been operating in India for about 10 years. We are the largest and most active agri-tech and food tech focused fund in South Asia. We look at backing entrepreneurs, building the future of agriculture and food systems. So our perspective is very much farm to fork. We've got about 20 plus companies in our portfolio now, ranging from hyperlocal weather forecasting for farmers to one of the largest, a company called Skymet, to one of the largest farmer platforms in India, a company called Dehat. But we also do quite a bit downstream in terms of looking at next generation CPG, FMCG, especially where there's a strong farm sourcing component. Building out the largest fresh produce brand in India, a new company called Clover. So quite active in the ecosystem. I've lived in India since 2007. So I like to joke that no longer an expat, I'm more of an immigrant. And my background is agribusiness. So I'm originally from Canada and the US, but worked for Syngenta and moved to India, not as a venture capitalist. I never thought I would do this for a living, but to help run one of the largest animal nutrition companies in South Asia. And from there, launched Omnivore about a decade ago. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone.
Great, thank you.
Well, I think I'm next. My name is Michael Kleindl. Thanks for having me here on the panel. I used to be a tech entrepreneur and venture investor for the last 20 years before moving to food tech, something like 2 years ago. And the reason for changing industries, still venture capital, but the reason for changing industries was simply that I felt that the food system really clearly needs a change, and that at my age, getting a little bit older, I felt that hopefully I could contribute a little bit with the network I had, the experience I had to really make a change to the planet, to the world. And so the result of that is that I co-founded with a Swiss partner of mine based out of Zurich. Maxence, welcome back then, hopefully shortly. We founded a venture capital firm. It's a traditional venture capital fund, 150 million euros for the moment under management. And we invest globally, stage agnostic, in things which are really food, from alternative proteins to cultivated or lab grown, whatever the industry will that called in the future, to synthetic biology, fermentation technologies, creating new protein platforms. And we included, because it's close to our heart, areas like food waste and packaging, two areas which are obviously a massive problem to the planet. And so far 12 investments, 55 million euros deployed. And it's a lot of fun. And every investment feels good because you're really doing something good.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Rashid Sultan. I'm the founder of Saber Ventures. We are a micro venture capital firm based in Kuwait, and we focus on investing in startups within the food vertical across MENA. We've made about 26 investments in the last 3 years. Our average ticket is anywhere between $50,000 and $150,000. we've seen a slew of startups within the food tech space, and I'm excited to be part of this panel to discuss the new world.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Susana and my co-panelists, and thank you, Camilo and Hernan, for the invite. I am Jose Garcia Pimentel. I'm currently the general manager for Uber Eats in Mexico. Uber Eats is the largest food delivery platform outside of China. So we have had an extraordinary opportunity to witness and be involved firsthand in the situation that has been transpiring over the past couple of months. We're naturally facing unprecedented times, as everyone in the planet is, but we're experiencing very closely to our retail partners, namely restaurants. And I think that there's tons of lessons that we can take from what has happened in conjunction with important nuances that emerging markets bring to the equation. So very happy to be here with you today.
Well, thank you all. I'm sure we are going to have a very lively discussion. I think to set the table, we don't have to state the obvious. We are living unprecedented times in which the COVID crisis has found us, on the one hand, isolated, on the other hand, in a connected world like never before, never in other crises. And we are going to be facing a recession and a recovery while being disconnected. So we're going to start this section, more or less 20 minutes, talking about how each one of you see the issue that everybody has in their minds, how to weather the storm when there are so many unknowns. What are the main challenges? And I would like to throw several topics. Not everybody has to answer all of them. If you want to take note and just jump in a disorganized way. First of all, how do you see food tech evolving in emerging markets? This is something that with my LAVCA role, food tech is seen as an up-and-coming sector. Is innovation on par to develop economies on this sector? Has the supply chain been disrupted? How have you seen companies and clients handle the situation? We know that even if a sector seems to be on the winning side, there are other factors that will make a specific company from that sector a winner or a loser. And that would bring us to the last question in this section, the big winners or losers, out of home, on-premise, B2C, B2B. So let's start with the first one. How do we see food tech evolving in emerging markets?
So I guess we will follow the same order. So
sure.
I will start with a couple of thoughts, and I'm sure everyone will complement. But food tech in emerging markets, to your question, I believe, will probably benefit overall, as my perspective, from the situation. As you know, and it sounds a little bit generic to say that, but there is this fabulous Chinese word that says in every crisis, you also have opportunities. And I'm a true believer of that sentence. Why I'm saying that? Because in these unprecedented times, you will see some new ideas popping up. You will see some entrepreneurs coming up with new ideas. And you will see, and I was discussing yesterday with some entrepreneurs, I was in your shoes, Susanna, moderating the entrepreneurs. And I was absolutely stunned to see how all of these entrepreneurs have managed to reinvent themselves as per this crisis. I mean, you had a company which was really focused on premium chocolate in airports and food service. So clearly, I mean, the two main clients were suffering dramatically. No more travel, no more restaurants. And the guy is reinventing themselves, providing chocolate cooking recipes for home consumption through a digital model. So really, I think, I mean, it will really move definitely some opportunities in that crisis. Having said that, I think we need to step back a little bit and look at what has happened over the last 2-3 months and the way companies have been weathering that storm. You have two phases. You have what has happened right now, which is the crisis, and what we're coming afterwards for the next 12, 18 months until we get the vaccine. That will mark the new reality, and probably we'll discuss that later. But if we look back into what happened over the last 2-3 weeks, I think the utmost priority for everyone was, of course, to maintain their employees safe and in good working conditions. And from a food perspective, many companies as well were also struggling to cope with the demand. It is interesting to see that the local environments clearly marked how we could operate. If you look at China or Asia, I mean, the lockdowns have been very severe. So here it has been kind of difficult. But when you look at other markets like Latin America or Mexico is a good example, I mean, where people saw with anticipation what was happening and what would be coming. I mean, you had this panic buying or pantry loading. And clearly for the food industry, this was a challenge to cope with the surge in demand while keeping the employees safe. So in a nutshell, I would say in crisis, you do still have opportunities. We will see entrepreneurs and startups reinvent themselves through digital, through direct-to-consumer models, and at the same time also with a great focus on people. Another and last comment I realized yesterday discussing with entrepreneurs is their willingness to stick to their roots whatsoever. That really struck me in yesterday's discussion. It's not because you're weathering a crisis that you need to change. At the opposite, what pushed you to create your company makes you even stronger in today's environment. So these are some kind of thoughts I had on this weathering the storm.
Yeah, just to chime in from the Indian perspective, it's been an interesting few months. Most people are probably aware that India has had one of the most extreme restrictive lockdowns in the world, which is not something that's easy for a nation of 1.3 billion people with not necessarily the best public health infrastructure to pull off. It started out in a fairly chaotic manner, where it was very unclear, even within the essential segments of the economy, what would be allowed to operate. There are video clips of police officers beating up truck drivers and, you know, all sorts of things that we struggled with initially. Thankfully, the situation has stabilized, and the government was always very clear that agriculture and food had to function. I think that's been probably a common theme for everyone who is attending today, is that, you know, certainly if you're selling chocolates in airports, that's very disruptive for your business, the new status quo. But I think what we've seen across our portfolio is because we engage so much with farmers, because, you know, many of our, at least even the downstream companies are making, you know, critical processed foods. While we had 2 or 3 weeks of chaos, things have come back online fairly fast. I've joked that no one is seeing a V-shaped recovery except for agriculture and food companies and groceries, because we're really, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first thing that everyone turned to. I think what's been interesting from a food tech perspective in India is, and this quote's been recycled a lot over the last few weeks, nothing happens for years or decades and suddenly everything happens at once. Things that were previously utterly unthinkable from a food tech perspective are suddenly on the table. Probably the most funny example of that is alcohol delivery, right? So in India, alcohol delivery was always verboten, right? Absolutely never going to happen. No one was allowed to touch it. And all of a sudden it's happening, right? All of a sudden state government after state government is legalizing it, because it was in the midst of the lockdown, they initially alcohol shops were banned, were shut, and then they opened them, and then there were crowds, hordes, right? Lines of 50, 60 people, the opposite of social distancing. And so all of a sudden, the government, which was never okay with this, is suddenly doing that. More importantly, there are agricultural reforms that have been debated for 20 years, right? Things that I was talking about in grad school when I was researching it, with respect to, in India, we have a system called the Mandi system, where all agricultural trade goes through regulated markets in local areas, and only through those markets. And everyone has known for years that this is terrible for farmers, that it puts them at an unfair disadvantage to traders, and the system is terrible, right? No one thinks the system really serves its purpose. It's a byproduct of the first Green Revolution. So academics for 2 decades have said, let's get rid of this. Nothing ever happened. And now all of a sudden, it looks like it's going to be dumped onto the ash bin of history. Similarly, we have legislation, the Essential Commodities Act, that prevents large-scale grain storage in India. It was meant to block hoarding and speculation. Effectively, it prevented the development of modern agricultural supply chains. The government announced last week they're probably going to gut the bill. This is a bill that dates from the 50s or 60s, laws that have stayed in place. So I think no one ever wants to waste a crisis. And I think as a result of this crisis, sclerotic challenges that have held back the agri-tech and food tech sector in India are suddenly being blown away. So to be clear, this is a great human tragedy, but I think for our sector in particular, we have bounced back in a V-like manner. And I think there are some reforms in India that are coming that will actually position us well for this new future.
Very interesting, the take on changes that are accelerated. Micah?
Yeah, maybe along these lines. I mean, for us, I mean, maybe you have to define a little bit clearer. For us, food tech is really everything which is animal free. So we are, even the team, we are all plant-based, and all we touch is, it has to be plant-based. So no animals involved. And so we did a lot of research, and it has been quoted a lot on media, wherever, that if you really go to the origin of that virus, and once again, this is not only COVID-19, it's SARS and it's swine flu and all that other stuff out there, which we had in the last years. It's not the first virus. It all starts somewhere in the animal surroundings. Is it a live market? Is it industrial farming? It's always the same. It always comes from the animal. And as Mark just said, obviously it's a human tragedy. In my personal view, it's all a little bit exaggerated because you can't kill economy, and then probably the post effects are much severe than what we are currently seeing, but that's another conversation. But the fact is that the topic where the virus comes from, and that the animal agriculture is a massive problem to the planet, is becoming more and more aware. And so we are seeing, after the first shock, obviously the first 2-3 weeks, everyone was in shock, complete standstill on deal flow, on investors, and how do we survive that? But once people realized, okay, well, obviously the world will continue in some sort, the virus is an accelerator, maybe not that, I think it's a structural accelerator towards, call it very general, a world of more sustainability. And more importantly, a sustainability in the food system. And when we talk about sustainability in the food system, then we talk about food tech, we talk about plant-based, we talk about all the innovation which is out there. And what we see is from investors who are now taking this up with accelerated speed. Not everyone, some are still maybe waiting a little bit until the dust settles, but the more open ones, they're coming back to the table. It's even inbound interest into the topic from very large families, institutional investors, which is really unheard of. We've been all in this space before, so it's not normal that an investor sends you on the info Blue Horizon Ventures an email saying, I'd like to invest 10 million. I mean, to me, that never happened. But it's reality, because people are realizing where that comes from. So for us in food tech, being plant-based, or let's say sustainable food systems, which for us is plant-based, that's it's a very positive thing to happen. It is attracting more capital as we speak. That's a fact. And whereas more capital, there will be more entrepreneurship, there will be more founders. We've closed 4 deals in the last 3 weeks, so we continue to be very, very active. So because now, especially, is I think we as venture capitalists, we have to fulfill our role supporting, you know, something which we believe is really a long-term change of the market, a long-term trend. I mean, it doesn't matter now, 3 months dip. I mean, we will be eating differently in 10, 15, 20 years. So it doesn't matter that we have a 3 months problem. And so we continued investing, and we see that the founders are even more motivated right now because they sense that they are doing something right, the founders we talk to. And so it's very encouraging, and we will continue being very active in the space, including, I mean, we talk about emerging market, not only in Switzerland or Europe, but we actually closing a deal as we speak in Mexico, so which is funny.
Excellent.
So,
It's
yeah.
nice to hear when investors don't give up. So Rashid, what's your take also with your fund?
Okay, so I'm going to try to kind of approach this differently from everyone else.
I like it.
No, I 100% agree that consumer behavior has changed during COVID-19 and the quarantine situation. What we've seen in the Middle East, similar to India, is this automatic ability of our governments to go online, which meant that consumers can go online. So none of the supermarkets, for example, in Kuwait would do grocery delivery. Now they're all doing grocery delivery. That was overnight. So from that, you then see this kind of immediate shift in consumer behavior, which means opportunities arise. The one, and I'll leave it as a question, but I'll try to answer some of the other things, is what we haven't figured out yet, or what I'm seeing entrepreneurs haven't been able to figure out yet, is the economics in my favor. And I know the next panelist after me is going to talk about economics and Uber Eats, but as we've seen with what's going on, how is that playing into the entrepreneur's mindset and VCs as they invest in entrepreneurs when we've seen the economics who haven't been in the favor of a startup? If I look at innovation, you know, I don't know if you want me to answer the other questions now, or we'll leave them for as we go forward.
Oh, sure. Do as comprehensive as you want, because we have many more questions, so sure. Okay. You know, innovation in the Middle East is nowhere near developed economies. It's probably nowhere near India or Latin America for sure. Has the supply chain been disrupted in the region? I think it will be. It hasn't yet, but I think it will be. One thing's kind of come back online. I think smart entrepreneurs will figure out that we do need to kind of cut the middleman. We need to figure out more efficient ways of delivering on that customer promise. And how have you seen companies, clients handle the situation? I've seen all sorts of entrepreneurs, those who are kind of, for lack of a better word, stuck and unable to deal with the changing world. Those who were intelligent or diligent enough to kind of pivot early on and figure out how to kind of reframe the world to their benefit. But, you know, at the end of the day, where I'm seeing the struggle now is today's new normal versus where is it going to be over the next number of years. You know, McKinsey came out with a report recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, that's saying that fine dining restaurants are only going to go back to pre-COVID-19 levels in late 2024. So if you believe it's going to take that long for people to really go back to kind of fine dining, what does that mean for the rest of the food ecosystem? You know, we invested 3 years ago in a Blue Apron coffee, let's say, in Kuwait. And after a year of spending heavy marketing, we realized that consumers weren't willing to kind of cook at home. And now during quarantine, in Kuwait, we're on a 24-hour lockdown, everybody wishes that startup was still around. And the founders are thinking of actually redoing it now. That's my kind of spiel for right now.
Yeah, if I may jump in, I think amazing comments across the board. I think, Rashid, you hit on a few things that are very important, and more not necessarily around the unit economics of players like Uber Eats. I think obviously different companies will be in investment modes that are different related to their maturity stage, and we're probably transitioning faster now that COVID has happened onto to a accelerated route to profitability, which is in and by itself a pretty interesting challenge. What I would say is that what we've been experiencing in Mexico, Latam, is that in their core restaurants and small retailers are entrepreneurs themselves. And what they've tried to do is, as many of the companies that you're supporting is trying to pivot towards ways to maintaining their business afloat. And it has been inspiring. Their ability to survive, to develop new ways of go-to-market, new revenue models. And the reason I believe this has been the case, first one is obviously there's a pretty clear need to do this. But second, there has been a change in how governments, at least in Latam, particularly in Mexico, have been willing to support industries, have been willing to support mom and pops, if you will, which are key drivers of employment, key drivers of GDP growth in industries like the restaurant industry, the retail industry, which drive hugely the GDP for countries. So they have had to respond with that type of support. And the other one is that the uncertainty remains. There's no deadline in the future. No one has been able to say by the end of whichever month, everyone's going to be out, and hopefully the 24-hour quarantines will no longer be, as I know this causes obviously different strains across the population. And I do believe there are a few things that remain unsolved or questions to be answered. The first one has to do with the end consumer. Obviously, now there's a very distinct need for people to get access to food. Going back to an earlier comment about the priority hierarchy of needs. But as we progress through these, I think there are two constraints that entrepreneurs and hopefully people that you're supporting will try to figure out, which is consumers only have so much bandwidth to consume opportunities. This is either through apps in a phone, through numbers in WhatsApp, because many of the restaurants have pivoted to food delivery through WhatsApp or any other such medium. And so that's one. So everyone coming with their own app, everyone developing their own call me and I get your food, it's probably not necessarily great for end users to consume. And the second one, which for me is very important, I'd love to hear your thoughts, is beyond COVID, there's a very likely economic downturn. So people's ability to pay for stuff, going back to the unit economics question that you posed, it's going to be very constricted. So how do you guys within the venture capital ecosystem figure out ways to try to solve for this particular thing? Because I don't believe COVID ends and everything goes back to normal for many reasons that you've just laid out. It's also that people are going to have fewer disposable income. And when that happens, everyone's going to have to start tightening up themselves. So the people that come with the best solution is probably going to be in a great position. The second thing that remains open to me is I've seen some sort of cooperation, but not necessarily organized, different industry chambers trying to do their own thing, but there hasn't been someone that aggregates all of the efforts so that there's a unique voice or a few voices that really can speak out for industries. And I think this is detrimental for retailers and anyone else within their value chain, because then their efforts become dissolved. These are just people screaming loud where everyone's screaming loud, so no one's being listened. So that worries me. And the third one is obviously customer acquisition. And I'm thinking more on the B2B business, because I hear some of the ventures that you're backing probably will eventually want to lead with a restaurant or a retailer. So how are these new startups thinking about customer acquisition in a world where there are super immediate needs versus the more business as usual or the more longer term needs? We talked about the plant-based. I love it. That's the diet I'm currently on. That's going to happen. That's going to happen in 5 years. That's going to happen in 10 years, hopefully before. I'm doing my work to have more people join me. But there are things that are happening today that has to do with liquidity, that has to do with working capital. How do different companies want to engage retailers that currently don't have the means to hire their offering. There are some more medium benefits that can be accomplished, particularly in LATAM, emerging markets. How do people optimize for the working capital? Solutions to aggregate suppliers, solutions to get access to better tech that will drive their insights. So I think those remain open. What I've seen recently through many people reaching out, and we're very fortunate, is that many people are trying to solve for this immediate, for the business as usual, as opposed to the immediate. So we would love to talk to your network of restaurants, because we have this offering that we can sell them, that they can access benefits and savings that can help them. Unfortunately, the reality is that the network of restaurants that are active in Uber Eats and other platforms are currently super constrained to actually hire this type of offerings. So how do you guys think about balancing the immediate versus more business as usual versus the long-term priorities in terms of customer acquisition? To me, it's an interesting question. I just wanted to pose it as something that in my mind remains an open issue.
Great. I think we can take the next several minutes also talking about war stories. What's working? What do you see that are those stories of resilience and the level of the founder of the company that is making the pivot and the rethink be on the way to recovery, as well as what would be the new normal? We have been talking about this. The Economist is talking about the 90% economy. The letter to CEOs that the founder of Airbnb said, you know, we know that right now we are not traveling, but when we travel, it won't be the same as before. So in this sector, so specific, what are some war stories you want to share with the audience? And what's your vision of what will be the new normal?
So I will start again, and I think I will piggyback on what Michael was saying. Clearly, this crisis will be an accelerator of change. I mean, some of the trends that were occurring before will accelerate for sure. However, and this is super interesting, while you will have a fundamental shift to some of these new trends, there will also be frictions. Referring, for example, on sustainable packaging. I mean, this really is a hot topic, but right now everything is delivered at home and everything is wrapped, and you have apples being wrapped 5 times with more plastic. So you have these types of frictions that will occur as well that I think we will have to cope with. But overall, I believe this new reality will be a catalyst of change, and therefore re-emphasizing a little bit what I was saying earlier on, that there will be lots of opportunities in this crisis, especially in food tech. I mean, food as an industry is structurally a very healthy industry to be in. I mean, even through crisis, I mean, people still need to eat. They will eat differently, but they still need to eat. So it's not like traveling or tourism or something like that, where you can cut if your disposable income is impacted. If your disposable income is impacted, you still need to eat. You will adjust how you eat, but you will continue to eat. So clearly, food tech as an industry overall, I would say, is rather protected, but with fantastic amounts of opportunities. Again, there will be challenges. You think of out of home, and Rashid, you were saying the report on how to recover. I was reading another one, looking back into the last crisis. It took 8 years in the US, 8 years over the last 2 crises to go back to the consumer spend out of home. So out of home will be structurally challenged for the next couple of years. However, within this context, you will see plenty of opportunities. I mean, and Jose was commenting it. I mean, the deliveries of restaurants will fly. So it really will be a matter of how every one of these founders can reinvent themselves to see and spot, and this is where they're strong, these opportunities, and really to accelerate the disruptions and the changes or the consumer trends that we were seeing before. That was just to reemphasize that. On the other side, a little bit on how we're preparing and for the future. I said also before, I mean, this new reality is likely to stay until a vaccine or a treatment is found, so that will take a couple of months, and then really our lives will be reinvented. And when I say our lives as food industry overall, you know, I mean, your supply will be impacted because you will have some scarcity of raw materials. I was discussing yesterday with entrepreneurs, and they had also some issues to secure the supply. So upstream, you will have challenges. In production, you will have challenges, of course, because if there is a resurgence of a second wave, I mean, what do you do with your staff and your employees? How do you maintain them safe? Logistics will be impacted because the retailers also, if there is a new pantry load, will ask for specific delivery conditions, door-to-door deliveries or whatsoever. Your sales will be impacted because some channels will strive. I mean, e-commerce is one, but not the only one. Direct-to-consumer will strive as well. Digitally enabled model will strive as well. Well, probably some other more conservative channels or traditional one will suffer. So really, your entire value chain will undergo changes. And I guess for the one that would succeed going forward is really how do you understand these little holes of opportunities and how you can adjust your business models to do that. And this is where I think the VC money will be extremely important to support the entrepreneurs in either go for these new opportunities or to readjust their business models. I mean, probably you guys have seen a business plan 2 years ago, 1 year ago, which probably today is no longer valid. So probably some flexibility from your end is also required over there. And the last point I wanted to say is also the role of not just the VCs, but also companies like Nestle. I mean, we are the world's largest food and beverage company, and we do have a responsibility in that. And as a matter of fact, we have engaged and are engaged in major investment in VCs as well. I mean, we have invested in various VCs as an innovation fund, and you may have seen we also have created a dedicated fund to transform the packaging industry, where we're investing in sustainable packaging funds. So clearly we do have a role to play here, and collaboration will be key. And there will be more space also for entrepreneurs to work hand in hand with Nestle. We have started this journey already, and this really is, to me, what I call the win-win-win combination, where the startups and the founders can pilot and work with Nestle, where Nestle is winning because they are helping us to fix an issue, and where the funds as investors are happy because their portfolio companies are growing. So clearly, this is what I see as a win-win-win combination, and I'm truly convinced that this is the future of FoodTech.
Great. Mark, any war stories from your portfolio? And let's keep in mind for the audience, if you can begin to write your questions in the Q&A section below in your screen. In 18 minutes, we are going to start that part of the webinar. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was an interesting war story in particular. We have a portfolio company called Clover, and they're trying to build kind of the village farms, sunset, largest fresh produce brand in India, all greenhouse grown. But they had built their business over the last 18 months focused on HoReCa, hotels, restaurants, caterers, otherwise known as deader, and completely freaking gone. Thankfully, they had begun to pilot general trade supply a couple months before COVID at a small scale. General trade, that's sort of the corner store in India. It's the the equivalent of a bodega. And thankfully, the first month of the crisis, right, in March, we saw sales drop by about 50%. In April, it was about 75%. And in May, we're back to pre-crisis levels. But what's interesting is the sales mix. We're not supplying HoReCa anymore. So this company has managed a pivot towards entirely supplying GT, general trade, bodegas, or food delivery, grocery delivery businesses. And that's now 100% of the offtake. So it's been crazy, but I think a lot of companies are going to have to do that. I think I also think it's important to remember that the restaurant business kind of sucked before, right? Like we all love fine dining, we all love QSRs. But these businesses, in many cases, were barely profitable. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see. I think a lot are going to go under, which is terribly unfortunate. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see what survives and what kind of hopefully more profitable, more sustainable model emerges on the other side of this. I think all of a sudden, a lot of these businesses are shifting towards cloud kitchens, right? A lot of these businesses are shifting towards more premium offerings. I have a cousin in Belgium who is, bringing home Michelin star delivery meals from across Brussels. So I think it's a little bit unclear which way we're heading, but I definitely think there's an opportunity to take things that we were used to but weren't that good to begin with, and hopefully bring out models that work better for owners, for suppliers, for employees, for everyone. And additionally, the biggest thing that we're seeing in India, right, is India has moved towards digitization in a major way over the course of especially the last 5 years, right? For a long time, the thing holding us back was connectivity. And the advances in 4G and smartphone penetration have ensured that, even in rural India now, about 20% of farmers have a smartphone. We think that in the next 2 years, that number is going to go to 60, 70%. And in general, this crisis has accelerated a lot of startups working in the market linkage space because farmers have essentially been stranded by the status quo. And so we've seen portfolio companies of ours. We have one called Aqua Connect in the aquaculture space. Farmers were unable to find markets for their fish and shrimp. And so all of a sudden, this very early stage startup was playing this incredible critical role in helping to make markets. We've seen this in Dehat for all of the 400,000 farmers on that platform. We've seen this in Clover for greenhouse farmers. And across our portfolio, we've seen an increased dependency, right, on these fairly early stage companies because the status quo broke down. And so I think this move towards digitization and this move towards more digital platforms, I think that's probably the clearest trend that will certainly, that is taking off and will gallop and leap ahead.
I go next to Sanna. It's my turn.
Sanna, you're on mute.
Susanna is on mute. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to repeat too much of what has been said. I think Maxence, I mean, I think you nailed it. There is obviously a strong trend towards delivery. We've seen it in portfolio companies. They are 50% ahead budget in March, April, and probably there will be in the future because people are now realizing, oops, that works. I mean, get this thing, and the apps work, and they're probably attracting a lot of new customers even. So that's clearly a trend we are seeing, which causes the problem you talked about, packaging the plastics. So it's great that Nestle, and I fully agree, you have a responsibility there to embark that topic and support and invest in whatever we'll call it, sustainable packaging or biodegradable or compostable, whatever we will see there in terms of innovation. So that's great. But the delivery is clearly one big thing. The second big thing is digitalization. We have portfolio companies where retail still works because food is essential good. So that it's not a massive problem or an emergency, but still you can't do in-store samplings. I mean, some product lines are less needed than others. So there was a certain impact on, and many of the portfolio companies we talk to in deal flow or existing portfolios, they are moving towards online sales. So whatever channel they go, direct with partners like Uber Eats or with Instacart or Global Uber, whomever it is. So they're going digital to complement part of their retail sales, maybe being stable or where they can't grow that fast given the situation. So that's trend number 2. And the third is, I don't want to repeat, but the plant-based thing is fortunately really taking up. Just look at Beyond Meat when they look at their numbers, how much more they were selling in the first couple of months. I mean, it's obvious, you know, one of the largest meat factories in the US shutting down. So what do you eat? So you have to go somewhere, and they are clearly one of the beneficiaries of it. It's just one example, and we see this across the board. But again, I think without repeating too much. And one last thing, it's good that you know, big corporates, Nestle is the one example here. We work with Bimbo, some of our Mexican friends on the panel know that company very well. We have a similar situation where we create that win-win-win between a corporate investor, a fund, and a portfolio company or a entrepreneur, where the corporate in a way is interested in a solution that the entrepreneur offers, and in a way accelerates the development of that company. And it's not only Nestle, we've seen this across the board, and this is something I haven't seen in the tech world before. I was used to do internet and tech stuff until 2 years ago. So in that industry, there was much more of a competition, and the large corporates were not that much going into supporting the startups. I mean, it's really great to see that in food and in retail, both parties to that are really collaborating with the VCs and with the startup scene, with the entrepreneurs, and it's much more a collaborative approach than a competition, what used to happen in tech. And this is really great to see, because in the end, it's a win-win-win. Everybody, you know, is accelerating the movements towards a more sustainable world.
Excellent. So Rashid, any war stories to share?
There are a few war stories, but none that I can actually share.
Okay.
I'll give you one of our startups, which is in grocery delivery, has not been performing during quarantine. And one of the reasons they haven't been performing is the founder happened to be stuck halfway across the world when the lockdown happened. And that didn't enable the organization to kind of really react well. And that's not boding well for the founder nor the business right now. So we're in kind of dire mode, but we'll see how it pans out. I wanted to answer the question of the new normal, Susanna, if it's okay. We talk about consumer behavior, and let's say the first line of businesses that touch consumers, right? Restaurants, grocery, the food they eat, how it gets delivered. How that goes up the value chain is a different ballgame, right? And then I assume Mark will have a better idea about farms in India and how they're kind of changing their business model to kind of enable that consumer behavior. But what we've seen here, for example, the government in Kuwait has announced many millions of dollars investment in anybody that solves any of the food security issues as a country we face, right? So forever, they haven't kind of shed any light on farming. I know we're in the middle of the desert, but you can still grow, you know, your basic goods, tomatoes, cucumbers, chilies, onions, leafy greens. But that technology requires investment, and given the market, it's a long payback period for any investor in that space. Now with the government shedding light on it, maybe there's an opportunity for us as VCs to, you know, we haven't invested in any farming in the region, obviously, given the landscape, but we're very excited about that. We think food security, you know, I'll give you an example. The largest dairy manufacturer in the region is based in Saudi, and ever since the quarantine happened, we haven't had any of their milk in the country, right? That goes to a second point, which, you know, goes to Nestle, Maxon's point, which is one thing, it's another question for the panelists, is how do we see brands playing a role in consumer behavior going forward, right? Because what we've seen during lockdown, and I went to the supermarket today, you're allowed one trip every 7 days and you're only allowed an hour. And, you know, my wife's on video call with me and I've got my shopping list and I'm like, listen, this isn't available. She's like, just get the next best thing. It doesn't matter. And so, you know, I'm realizing, hey, I'm actually saving a little bit of money because I'm not getting the brands she's used to. And it works. I'll leave it there.
Excellent points, Jose.
Yeah, amazing stories. Absolutely. I'd share a few that we've seen, and these are generally speaking, because it would be hard for me to say one restaurant versus the other. But what I would say is that even in the face of their businesses completely collapsing, what we saw was impressive energy and optimism in terms of how would they be able to turn around the situation. So someone said earlier, the Chinese proverb about finding opportunities in times of adversity. I think it was Maxen. And we've seen that in how restaurants have turned around their menus, how they try to develop something that might touch upon the brand thing, Rashid, which is how do you convey experience that your consumers, your customers used to have when they were at your point of sale? How do you convey? How do you transfer that convenience through digital media? And even when people are definitely trying to save a few dollars here and there, how do you try to distinguish yourself? Because the problem with that line of argument is that everyone becomes commoditized, right? So every single restaurant is the same restaurant. And that's problematic for different reasons. One being obviously the transfer of value within the value chain just starts experiencing some sort of disruption that has implications naturally. The second thing that I would want to share in terms of war stories is people within startups, people within incumbent companies like Nestle or Uber, if you will, somewhere in between, how they are extremely passionate with their mission, and how is it that they've been able to, you know, work twice as much in finding solutions for their stakeholders throughout the value chains. We have this amazing story here in Mexico where we used to take anywhere from 7 to 10 days to have a restaurant from, you know, selling the opportunity and having them deliver their first dish to an eater that we call them. We're able to change our processes and our systems so that we could do that within 2 hours for specific restaurants. So if you think about the type of innovation that has to occur to shorten those cycles in that large amount of time, it does speak to the energy and the passion that people bring to the day-to-day, and how it's very important, at least in our minds, to ensure that everyone's very aligned to the mission and that people are here because they know that what they're doing is important. And I oftentimes say that what we're doing is every day much more important than it used to be before, going back to the whole industry acceleration piece. Those are the two stories I would share.
Excellent. We are now starting the section of Q&A. I remind everybody that there will be a poll and we are interested in your answers. So it's been, I can see it right now online. So if you can answer it, we'll appreciate it. Just a follow up to you, Jose, somebody says, home delivery increases or is increasing strongly. How do apps that give that service may transform the food distribution? And are you, as Uber Eats, intend to enter the supermarket delivery market?
Yeah, thank you for the question. What I would answer is that we're super customer obsessed. So when we're seeing every day that users through our app want to access more types of retail categories or offerings, because we also do different things in the ride-hailing line of business, such as delivering packages, for instance. So we're definitely moving ahead and starting doing groceries delivery in different parts across the world. We have signed pretty interesting alliances with incumbent supermarket chains in the US, Europe, in some places in Latam as well. And we announced back in October our intention to acquire the majority of Corner Shop, which is a Chilean startup that has beautiful tech, has beautiful principles. It's an amazing team. So that's still on the works. So for sure, that's within what we want to accomplish. And more broadly, in terms of how do we change the value chain, I think that the platform business model continues to be relevant, not only in the last mile, but also more upstream within value chains. So I do believe that players like Uber or any others, there might be a few that are slightly more specialized because they were born in that particular piece of the supply chain might be in great position to offer and create tons of value for restaurants and different retailers. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. There is another question that whoever feels compelled to answer, feel free. It says, we have been talking about community farming for city dwellers. Some thoughts coming out is developing rooftop garden kit solutions and selling them to condos, factories, and office buildings where crops are sold provided to people in those buildings and local communities. From a venture capital perspective, do you see vertical community farming as a viable solution and profitable trend for post-COVID-19? I don't know who wants to be the first one answering that.
Mark, do you want to take a crack at it?
I'm happy to chime in here. So I think there is vertical farming is clearly an interesting space, and there is a real desire on the part of consumers to see to reduce the food distance associated with what they eat. And given this world of lockdowns, right, and as Rashid was mentioning, closed borders, this need to have localization of the food supply, I think, is going to become increasingly important. I think, most of us here are talking about emerging markets. In emerging markets, which are disproportionately in warmer climates, for the most part, the vertical farming argument, if you gets a bit stretched, it works really well in Brooklyn and San Francisco, and where farms are far away, and where you have a very low cost of electricity and obviously cheap LEDs that drive the economics of this. I think when we're talking about Mexico or India, you're probably looking at a shift towards more things under greenhouses from a climate resiliency perspective. I do think there'll probably be niche opportunities for vertical farms, even in emerging market cities, but probably for very high value crops. We're talking, kind of herbs and strawberries and maybe cherry tomatoes. But I think you're going to see more and more advances in large scale greenhouse and polyhouse technologies that will probably be more relevant for consumers.
Great. Rashid, I think you wanted to say something.
No, I completely agree with Mark. When it comes to the vertical farming, it comes down to the economics, right? There's a really good example in the UAE, in Dubai, of a container farming startup. And the problem, and he got the first kind of residential farming license in the UAE, which enabled his containers to sit on top of homes, and you could kind of grow your leafy greens and eat them if you want to sell them in your restaurant, etc. But the unit economics didn't make sense because of the yield on the product. As Mark mentions, with the temperature that we have, these are options, but they're not yet viable. Now, with consumer demand changing, will they become viable? Possibly.
Okay. Another question is for anyone again. Are there any companies you're investing in that are solving the centralized food supply chain problem? If yes, how are they solving this? We have here Michael saying no. So this is interesting. So it's good. Then we have a request of FoodTech startups attending this webinar and saying how can they reach you to pitch you. So if you're interested in that, only if you're interested in that, please in the chat send your way of that people can get in touch with you. Don't forget the poll at the same time.
Susanna, sorry to interrupt, we cannot write into the questions, I think, or can we?
Yeah, you can write not
Okay.
in the chat. In the chat, you can write your email or however you want to be reached. So in the meantime, while we get more questions, and I think it may be almost the last one, you have been talking about collaborations among startups in emerging markets. Do you see that growing once things get more stable, or going back to each one to its own and trying to be the best? And do you think we will have enough venture capital investment to keep fueling growth?
I'm happy to take that one, maybe myself. What I said earlier is we do see more capital coming into food tech, especially sustainable food. So I think there is sufficient capital. I mean, there's never sufficient capital, but I think there is a clear trend that more capital will be inflowing into that space, and I can only encourage our founders, entrepreneurs considering doing so, that they should give it a try. There's clearly money from different pots available in all stages, and so I would say yes.
Excellent. Any other ones?
Maybe just complementing, while there will be more money and more money flow in food tech, it will also be a good stress test for the existing startups to see how robust were the initial business models. So I think the food tech sector should come out reinforced twofold. One, because there is more money, and two, because they will force themselves to be even more assertive in some of the choices they're doing, and seeing that the business models are really robust.
Excellent. Rashid.
No, I wanted to caveat the answers. Yes, there's funding. Yes, there's money. Yes, there's opportunity. But I don't want people to have the misconception that because of COVID-19, there's suddenly more money going into the food space because it's the only space that kind of will rebound faster than any other industry. I think what the panelists are trying to say is that there's more opportunity within food now to enable further growth, and as such, there will be more money coming in. But if you come back to kind of VC or investors with the same ideas you had 3 years ago, you haven't really done anything, right? Take advantage of the fact that COVID has enabled consumer behavior and technological advances within the food industry to enable kind of better food value chain.
Excellent. So there are two questions that maybe before this section is over, we can answer. One is, do you see artificial intelligence playing a role in your industry? And the second one, from supply chain to delivery, there are many steps to optimize in order to offer from farm to fork, as mentioned. Any recommendation on what is most needed to optimize? So I saw Mark, whenever I said artificial intelligence, you immediately nodded. So I take you want to answer.
Yeah, we're taking multiple AI and machine learning bets right now. It's a space where India has quite a bit of talent because of the engineering sector there. One of our portfolio companies by the name of Intello Labs is basically building out an AI platform over the fresh produce industry globally. So they're working with people like Dole and Ocean Spray and Amazon. And they're essentially digitizing quality from farm all the way to across all channels, but including to home, which is leveraging computer vision. It's leveraging IoT, spectrometry in some cases, but basically building this integrated stack so that you can track quality from the point of harvest to the point of consumption. There are certainly other AI bets we're taking around robotics, around field sensors. But we certainly see this as a space of immense opportunity and a chance for emerging markets, which never built conventional supply chains the way they were built in North America or Europe, to really leapfrog as we did with mobile technologies. So it's an exciting opportunity for us.
Excellent.
And maybe just to complement, I mean, AI, there is potential throughout the entire value chain. I mean, from supply to forecasting, to remote maintenance, to in-demand planning. I mean, AI has a big role to play in machine learning and augmented reality to make trainings. I mean, we do use AI throughout our entire value chain, from supply to productions to sales to distribution. So yeah, plenty of room for AI in the food industry.
Excellent. Well, I'm tempted for one more question. At the beginning, Jose set an open question to the panel regarding a generalized economic downturn post-COVID. Could any panelist comment on whether you're seeing that tech-related food industry will take a larger slice of a smaller cake?
Happy to say yes. I don't know whether the slice will not be smaller because we have a population which is growing big time. So the overall cake will be increasing, but clearly food tech will take a larger share of that. That's a fact.
Any other comments on that? Another one says, do you think it will be possible to sustain the demand of food delivery? Will more competition appear? It seems that one is heading your way, Jose, but everybody can obviously pitch in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think competition is great in any industry. So if anyone's coming with a better offering and they gain a piece of the pie, an expanding pie, I think it's the best for consumers and it's the best for the industry. On our side, we continue to utilize different tools, machine learning, AI for sure. It's one of the things that drive our engines. And we do believe that there will be the opportunity to fulfill that demand as long as the restaurants that serve these markets remain operating. And that's very important for us to make sure that we support them so that we have a nice selection of offering to put in front of our eaters. From a logistics, last mile delivery, I think we're in a great position. The gig economies traditionally are slightly counter-cyclical, if you will, and so that some people unfortunately will lose employment opportunities, and they can think about gig economies as a fallback to face their transition until they find the next opportunity. So we believe from a supply perspective, unfortunately, because this will mean more people unemployed, there will be opportunities to get earnings through Uber Eats or some other platforms.
Sure, and that can be a whole webinar on the future of work that has been discussed even before this crisis. A very last question before we go into the closing. Somebody's asking, what new opportunities do you see in fresh fruit and vegetables in the business of? Any takers?
I would say digitally enabled model with sourcing being close from where you stay. I mean, this is something we have seen growing a lot, where you have platforms where small farmers from close to your city can pull on their offers, and then you do have a good delivery systems. With a direct-to-consumer approach, you have your database, you have personalized offers, you tell the stories of the farmers you're working with. So this is something I've seen a lot throughout many countries.
Excellent. So it's been my pleasure to moderate this panel, and I will pass it now on to Hernan Fernandez from Angel Ventures to do the closing. Hernan.
Well, thank you very much, Susana. Thank you very much to our panelists. This has been an amazing panel on the future and on food tech. You know, we are so blessed to have so many industry leaders ranging from literally every corner of the world. We have an amazing number of participants as well, well over 100 on all channels. So, You know, this, as you know, has been recorded, so it will be there for posterity. And again, very, very grateful. Special mention, of course, to our sponsor, IDB Lab. You know, we're very, very thankful for your support. And well, on behalf of the organizing committee from Angel Ventures and Iliad Partners, we are very, very grateful again for everyone who joined us. And we remind you that next week, we're gonna have the same Rethink series, both on Wednesday for entrepreneurs and on Thursday for VC and corporates. And the topic of that week will be property tech. And then we'll follow with supply chain, with logistics and last mile delivery. But for any property tech entrepreneur from emerging markets, same time, same days, next Wednesday and next Thursday. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.